Dear sister, we live in a complex time full of ambiguities. Sometimes the next step may appear hazy as we are called to create a new path. But this is what I want you to know. Our people are brilliant. We are intrepid, and we carry on. From our youngest age, there are concepts instilled in us, ways of being from which we cannot be separated. Respect for nature, for Celia is in charge. Respect for our elders, for they have shown us the way. And sharing, for looking out for each other, we know that we'll thrive. These values come from somewhere. We are shaped by our environment, and for us, that means being in one of the harshest environments for thousands of years. Because of this environment, every motion was executed with purpose, with incredible consistency, in accordance with the exact way that it was taught to you. Careful, intentional, balanced. Then strangers came. Our structures dismantled, and our children removed. Yet our people said, I am still here.
Residential schools started in the 1870s, and they lasted all the way up until 1970. So they lasted for 100 years. They were pretty much started in order to have Native Americans conform into the white world and to erase all of their culture, erase all of their language. I think everyone knows the wise saying of kill the Indian, save the man. So that was pretty much the goal of a lot of residential schools. Another thing that they did was enforce Catholicism onto the children and the teens, and they would bring that home to their families. When they would come back to their community, they were definitely not the same kid. And that didn't just change that kid who is now elderly. It changed the family that would come after them. It would change those generations to come. Even though outside looking in, it might not seem like these kids were taken, because it's like, oh, it's a school. But a lot of kids were essentially kidnapped from their families by these like missionary type people. And, you know, they were shipped off and they would wake up, they would have all of their things taken, surrounded by a bunch of other kids that didn't know where they were. And, you know, they were forced to cut their hair. They were forced to do certain things that were just totally foreign to them. You know, these nuns and these priests would totally mentally manipulate these kids and tell them that everything they ever knew is wrong and that they were dirty and that they were disgusting for being like that. Because they wanted to kill that part of these kids. You know, imagine how you would react if you were told that, you know. It would probably stick with you for a very long time, as it did with these people who survived residential schools. We're still dealing with lasting effects of that shame and of not knowing the language.
It's almost a couple generations that skipped, I would say.
Yeah.
Because my mother, me, okay, now 3. Well, she's starting to learn it, so...
It's crazy. I've been learning since I was in pre-K.
Well, see, this is what I say. I mean, I am so thankful that I was able to speak Mohawk because I would have never learned it. So what can you do?
Oh, God.
Just introduce yourself.
I can say... Well, now that... But it might be wrong.
You're not going to get yelled at.
I know, but it's embarrassing. Because I've been learning...
See? That's the biggest culprit. Being embarrassed. You know, it's better to talk it and be wrong. And you know.
At least try.
Well, what's your Mohawk name?
Gyohliwali.
No,
Gyohliwali. No?
no, I don't know what you're saying.
Gyohliwali.
Guliwale. Guliwale. What does it mean? You're adamant.
Yes, persistent.
Yeah, Guliwale.
Yeah.
So I've been saying it wrong.
Yeah.
My family necessarily did not grow up traditional. We didn't really know any of the traditions. We didn't know much about the culture. All we knew is that we were, Mohawk. It's this underlying feeling, when you're growing up on the res, that you're not gonna ever know your culture. Or you're not gonna ever learn how to speak the language. So that definitely is a really big fear of mine. Not being able to carry those practices and those traditions down to, my future kids.
To answer the question of who she is as an Indigenous woman, you have to really know who you are and where you come from. And I've always said to Meg, we are connected. This is how I envision it. Through, my ancestors, my grandmother, my great-grandmother, and they were very strong women who had to endure and live a hard life. And, we're all connected through the heart. They stand behind us. And that's the strength I try to give my kids.
I feel like there is a part of me that feels like I don't even know who I am. It's easy to feel the feelings, but it's hard to know why you're feeling them. Sometimes I don't even feel like, cultured enough to speak my own language. Sometimes I don't feel like I check all the boxes in that area. I would always feel less than the kids who did know their, traditions. And it wasn't even like they would treat me like I was less than. If anything, I could just ask them a question and they would be happy to answer it. It was just that shame and guilt that I carried with myself that I didn't know since I was a young girl. And that shame and guilt, unfortunately tends to spread across big parts of the community. And we tend to blame ourselves. It should not be a blame game amongst ourselves. We are products of colonization. But I think a big thing about trying to overcome those fears is saying to yourself that I might not know this certain aspect of my own culture, but what I do as an Indigenous woman is valid.
Ukapernik, Pauteriga, in Yusipta. So today, what I'm doing is I'm making lunch, and I'm having unalik, and I'm also having alabik kwak. And so our unalik is our muktuk, which has been boiled. And so muktuk comes from the Aravik, which is our bowhead whale. And so if you look at a piece of Unalik, you have the black skin of the bowhead, and then you have the blubber of the whale. There's nothing like this. Like, when I take this bite, it's just this familiarity that goes back to it, like my earliest memories, but it's almost like when somebody calls me by my Inupiaq name, it's different. Like when someone calls me by my Inupiaq name, I feel it down my spinal column. Like it comes from inside me in a way that feels different. And it's like, oh, you know me, and we're connected by this shared understanding. So I have like this one specific anecdote where a number of times I would say, you know, my Inupiaq name is Kirnyang. And then somebody would say, oh, is it on your birth certificate? And I would say, no. And then they would say, so it's not your real name. Oh, that really hurt. And I didn't have like, you know, the faculties to respond to that. I didn't have an understanding about why that even hurt. And it just felt like I was hurting inside. Like I felt like a needle in my heart repeatedly. And to the point where I remember like I would cry at night because it was so painful, these interactions. It was also a time of some general confusion in terms of my identity, and then also a period of actually acute pain as I worked to figure out my identity as an Inupiaq woman, specifically one who, and up until she was 21, had never been to our communities on the North Slope and was not raised on Inupiaq lands. Would you like to share a little bit about your background and who you are?
Yes, my name is Aggie. Okay.
Keep your unpin.
Never mind. Delete it.
Keep going.
No, dear. But when I got older and I met my husband, and we started having kids, it was a joint decision as to where we would raise our daughters. We have 3 daughters. And we decided for them to have the best upbringing as for education, that we would not live in a small village. But for me, because of my upbringing, and so that the daughters wouldn't forget their heritage part, I had all these pictures and videos. I had all the clothing, the native jackets, the parkas, that we call them, the little muklaks that the girls had used, the little mittens. And I had all these pictures that I would show the girls, and as well as teach them with some of the basic words. And that was one way of teaching them, so that they wouldn't be lost in translation, so to speak. And they'd still have their side of the native heritage, and they'd know.
So when I think about my nephews, I am incredibly intentional in ensuring that they know who they are. If I'm not intentional and my family's not intentional, like it's our turn now, then that's just not going to happen. They're not going to, you know, eat Inupiaq food. They're not going to hear our music or participate in our dances. I was visiting with my family, and we had this blank map of Alaska, and I was teaching him and where our Inupiaq hub communities are. Okay, here we are in Wasilla. This is Utkalavik. This is where Auntie sometimes goes and works. So that way these places are real to him. They'll never be strange names to him that he doesn't know. Like they're going to become exposed at some point, even if we never, talked about it. And so I wonder if that experience might be a little bit abrupt, and that feeling of searching is not a fun one, in the sense of the disconnection. Like I wouldn't want them to go through this feeling of disconnection and feeling like they missed out on something and having to learn so much as an adult.
I'll always have those memories of telling my daughters and now my grandsons about how their aka, which is grandma, went hunting and the things that I got to experience firsthand.
I want them to be able to say, like, I grew up hearing the language. I want them to be able to say, like, I grew up, like, knowing how to dance. Like, Auntie Dia taught us about our communities and told us stories, because that is a consistent line of identity starting from childhood.
We need to start decolonizing the structures that are already here. We need to start questioning the systems that we were told our culture is based from. Because I don't think the culture that we're necessarily learning, like, most of our stuff is oral, like, it's coming down, like, it's not always written, like, so it's sometimes hard to find information, so you're basically putting your complete faith into the person who's telling you your culture, right? So, like, the people that come into the schools and tell you how things should be done, like, you grew up thinking that's the right way and that's the only way, but, like, when are we going to start questioning when those systems have, like, subtle forms of misogyny or racism, or they're not very inclusive to LGBTQ+, like, when are we going to start questioning those systems? Because I don't feel like those traditions are actually traditional. When we talk about how Native Americans were treated, the teachers are still, like, upbeat about it, and they're like, well, you know, it happened a long time ago and now everything's all fine. And they don't go into detail how badly of, like, a genocide it was. It just makes me think of, like, truly how badly the education system has, like, failed other parts of this country. For it to be offensive that we ask questions about our own history, I think is even more ridiculous. I cannot tell you how many fights I have gotten, arguments, with certain teachers, because I'm like, are you sure that happened? Because, you know, that history book is, like, how old, and you're gonna listen to this one man talk about it when I have an entire community of people telling me otherwise, because they actually lived through it, and they're descendants of people who lived through it.
Utu kana quraniak turut. I churuk kivut. Mekliktup dennun. Any bait. Elit kuset. Any purala nirlo. Taimanigu. Inuit. Any puraraniak tut. Nuna kiptini. Mekliktulu. Utu kanalu. Suman una. Ukausiri sukpisiru. Any piaru rutki. Ukausikput. Damai sungitlugu. Ukapiak tuni arika.
One of my favorite Inupiaq words is oxalike, and it means to laugh so hard that one runs out of breath. One of the fun things about language is that, you know, there are so many words that we have been able to develop that maybe you don't see in English. Like, these are common experiences. To laugh so hard that one runs out of breath is something that, you know, many people do all over, but do we have a word for that in English? With colonization, like, there are so many different things that are, you know, Western influence that I don't even maybe know of. I'm still uncovering, I'm still recognizing, like, oh, the way I thought about this actually didn't come from my people. So one of the reasons that I love our language and learning language is because the words that I speak were words that my ancestors spoke thousands of years ago, and they also connect us. I grew up with probably about 35 words or maybe more, that were Inupiaq words that we just used regularly. And I heard that those words are the most precious words because those are the words that are unbroken. They have been passed down from generation to generation in this unbroken lineage as far back as our language goes.
Because my mom didn't know the full language, wasn't able to speak to me, except the basics. And the beauty of this education is very important because my daughter ended up going and learning the full language. And in turn, it has helped her and shaped her into the person that she is, going into fully embracing her native side and able to take this language on and be a teacher, so to speak, and helping to teach other kids that even though they live not in a village growing up, but they live in an urban place, that they still can do this. They still can master the speaking language. They still can keep the heritage alive.
I'm not the only one in the boat that didn't learn as much as they wish they could have, because it's actually a super common thing. Because I felt like a poser for the longest time. And after having certain discussions, which I had never thought to even have with certain people before this, I learned that, you know, if you're doing something for the community and you're trying to learn and you're trying your best, that's all that matters. It's okay to not know. Because we went through a huge disruption as people. And if we're climbing out of that hole still and we're just trying to learn what was lost, like, no one should be invalidated. And you shouldn't feel ashamed of trying to learn.
I think about how power is shared, and there are two things that happen. The first thing is to listen, and the second thing is to believe. And when I think about what we as like Native people, it seems like we sometimes are asking to be believed in our experiences, or other communities of color. Who are we asking to be believed of? We're asking people in power, people who are power to make decisions, and you know you're in power if you have the option to just believe or not believe somebody. Like, that is an incredible amount of privilege, and what a place of power to be in. I think that so much would change if people would just believe. And when I see allies, they are people that have done both of those things. And when you have more people doing that, like I said, things can change so quickly.
I'm proud to stand here on the ancestral homelands of the Lenape tribal nation. The president-elect and vice president-elect are committed to a diverse cabinet, and I'm honored and humbled to accept their nomination for Secretary of the Interior. My grandparents, who were taken away from their families as children and sent to boarding school in an effort to destroy their traditions and identities, maintained our culture. This moment is profound when we consider the fact that a former Secretary of the Interior once proclaimed his goal to, quote, civilize or exterminate us. I'm a living testament to the failure of that horrific ideology. I also stand on the shoulders of my ancestors and all the people who have sacrificed so that I can be here.
Yet our people said, I am still here. When dances stopped, when our people used a foreign tongue to utter new words and our whole world changed. They did so still understanding the fullness of who we are when they said, I am still here. Our families were nearly wiped out by illnesses we had no inherent immunity to. You are descended from the ones who survived. And every measure of that strength is alive in you still. You have been prepared by generations past. You are already ready. And so, I have no doubt you'll sojourn to the next adventure in a most fervent and wholehearted way. It is the only way anyone in your family has ever known.
The thing she said about like what would it look like, what would it feel like, I think of like extinction. Like this is the first thing that popped in my head. Yeah. And like that there's this common theme where like we say time and time again, people think they're extinct. Like people literally think like they don't exist. So it's like we made them quote unquote extinct, but they are not because they endured.
The definition of a watershed is a bunch of separate tributaries flowing together into one. And I feel like that's definitely what we're doing literally with this class.
We are composed of a bunch of different individuals coming from different walks of life with different talents and areas of expertise, and we kind of all nicely flow together into one body of water that has so much potential to create actual change.
Everyone can also have a watershed moment in their life. It's a moment that we might have gone through or haven't gone through, but it's typically a moment that alters you or impacts your way of viewing something.
The watershed moment changes everything for you. You can't keep living life the same way you had ever since that point in the timeline. And I think that everybody has their watershed moment, and I think that's our mission, to create a watershed moment for people.
Interview, take one.
I would definitely say at first that I underestimated the fact that we are doing this documentary during the time of COVID. When we were talking about where we should go and what the plan should be, and we decided that for the safety of everyone involved, we shouldn't actually travel to anywhere, it just seemed like a simple decision, an obvious decision to me.
The pandemic was a huge barrier and really held us back from being able to shoot like a traditional documentary team.
I guess going into this year, we truly just didn't know how we were gonna film a documentary remotely during a pandemic. There were so many obstacles in our way. The second we got over something new would come in our path that we'd have to figure out.
I thought that connecting with the team and being able to fully take part in the process would be very hard. But honestly, everybody adapted super quickly. It was like we knew what we had to do in order to get our story out there and to create the story that we wanted. And so I was over like 400 miles away, but it felt like I was in the lab at all times regardless.
I feel like that was a big roadblock for me in the beginning, was like seeing people with face masks on, and like we were zooming in for classes, and like it was kind of awkward to me. But then getting to know everyone still through that, and like being in the doc lab lately, you can really get a feel for everyone's passion. And their sense of humor and why they're there in the first place. Like, everyone's very unique, and like we all get along like in a super unique way.
Usually in previous years, this class, you're done shooting the entire doc after fall break October. So that's kind of where a lot of your multimedia is directed, and you kind of get to pick up sort of quickly. Your multimedia was really gonna have to be a strong anchor for gathering the audience before production and after.
I think a fear of mine was that we wouldn't be able to connect as well with our collaborators and the people that we were featuring in the documentary because we weren't going to physically be in their space with them.
So this year was a lot different with collaborators because we had to send them cameras and they were doing all the filming.
Today, actually within the next couple minutes, I will be sending out our equipment to our lovely, lovely collaborators who are located in upstate New York and Alaska.
And we were kind of very hands-off, and we had a lot of trust in our collaborators where they had to do all the filming and they did all the storytelling, and we just had to facilitate everything else in between.
Going into the process, we didn't really know how it was going to turn out, sending cameras to people that we never met in person, trusting people with the filming that would be in our documentary, but our collaborators just went above and beyond any expectation I think any of us had.
We Zoom with these people hundreds of miles away, thousands of miles away in Alaska, but I really feel like we've gotten so close with them and just spent so much time with them, and especially in a time in the world where physical distance is like so imperative.
It was very casual too. It was so much fun. It was like being able to just jump on Zoom calls with them and FaceTime them throughout the week when they were filming, and it was like, that was a big fear for me too, that we weren't gonna have these relationships, which is what this class is all about, so.
Currently, I have the last bit of my SD cards in here. I have 5, and I am sending it out to Corbin. Crazy.
I think my best experience with the doc is getting to know Meg.
Okay, hold on. I need to like put my serious personality on.
Meg is incredible. She's taught me so much just about life and how to love people and how to let people in.
She has been such a light this semester, and is definitely one of the best things to come from this all.
I think Cordelia, just the way she speaks with such intelligence and maturity and sophistication, she has so much experience in her life that she's willing to share. She's just this like big picture thinker, and she's able to articulate it just so perfectly and beautifully.
Just if I could just communicate that everybody has a culture and that culture really is like your normal, I think that would be really great. I would be really happy with that.
At first, like when we were just getting the ball rolling, I was definitely just trying to produce a documentary. And then after meeting Cordelia and trying to tell her story with her, that's when everything shifted. And I definitely started doing things for her to make sure people heard her, because everybody deserves to hear her infectious laugh and just the words she has to say.
I think one of the most rewarding experiences being in the class thus far has been like the relationships that have been formed, not only with our collaborators who are incredible, and I'm so thankful to know them and have them be a part of this process.
When you're with this many passionate people all striving for the same goal, it doesn't make that job that hard. I guess I'm just surprised of like how well we came together when it was kind of hard to come together with everything that was going on.
What I've learned the most is that it's not just like one person, one mind, like working on the doc. Like you really need to be open to collaborating with a bunch of different people that like you've probably never even met. And so I think I've learned a lot about being able to work on a team and work together with a bunch of different people.
It's the friends, the faces, the professor, everybody on this team has not only brought into my life what it means to make a documentary film and to watch it and to understand it, but also what it's like behind the scenes, to make friends, to meet people, to make experiences and memories. So the combination of those two things is what makes this enjoyable for me.
I feel like I was asleep
And now I feel like I'm awake and I can see things so much more clearly, and I understand things that I didn't before about myself and like my individual culture and then other people's cultures as well.
I would say that seeing your work finally come to fruition at the end of the day, it's such a long process and such a hard process that as you're doing it, there's lots of moments where you just feel like you're banging your head against the wall. Like so much goes into the next step that when you finally get to the next step, it's almost like, wow, like how did that happen?
Just seeing our process and seeing what we're making and feeling truly encouraged every day to keep going.
Seeing things start to come together as you're editing or as you're getting footage back and piecing together the story is honestly amazing. And then just working with people and having those bonds grow, being in the lab and just like laughing and getting to know people.
I really got to explore and experience a bunch of different things, which gave me so much insight into what I want to do after this class and into like my career. So I think that was one of the most enjoyable things that came out of this class.
I just hope that people see the film and feel like they kind of had a chance to meet the collaborators. And I hope that it feels like a real experience having met a part of these people when people watch the film.
I think a lot of people are going to really connect to this film and focus on what they need to do to love themselves and really express who they are. And I think that the story that we're trying to tell does that perfectly, and I think a lot of people can connect to that on many different levels.
For people watching this, I encourage a similar thing where it's like no matter what background you come from, I feel like Indigenous people are ignored a lot and they don't really have this platform a lot of the time to speak, or if they do, nobody really listens. I encourage you to not only think about certain groups or like think that if you are a good person, you shouldn't have to question yourself, and to always think about others and like what they've gone through and what they continue to go through and your place in that.
All right.
Welcome to the hot seat.
Hot seat.
Today we're gonna answer your hottest questions in the hottest seats.
Who do you like more, me or Julie?
That got silent. Brendan looked like he could choose between his mom and his dad. He was like, I didn't hear what you said. What?
We're on an island, and you have to kick one person off for like survival purposes only. Who would you kick off?
That's so unfair. That's so
you have to vote someone off.
Okay, that's so unfair. I'm clearly gonna get voted off. Because she's an adult, she knows that end things. He watches Survivor like it's his job. I'm clearly the dead weight.
Yay.
My fun/fun-esque memories of doc was the first semester I'd pick little Michaela Scott up every day and we would go get Chick-fil-A beforehand. And that just really set the tone for the whole day.
Hey everyone.
Hey.
Welcome back to Doc Behind the Doc.
Welcome back, here we are.
It's your favorites yet again.
We're literally here all the time, but that's what we need to be doing.
Wait, like our doc?
Yeah,
I thought you meant like a funny. No, I thought they meant like
a funny story.
I thought you meant like a funny doc. Okay.